When you think about your examples in the STAR model, think about the R first. Think about the results. Think about your examples like a newspaper headline. Because I think a lot of candidates tell you about their tasks and actions. They tell you about what they do every day and don't spend enough time telling you about the impact that's had for customers or the business. We enable the business to do A, B, C, or we've delivered 1, 2, 3 for the customer. Start with that and then work backwards to the situation, the task, and the actions.
What are your top 3 recommendations for any candidates who want to work at Wise?
It's actually really easy. But I think to go deeper is that...
Hello and welcome to another Candidate Journeys episode of the Open to Work podcast. I'm joined this week by Jerome Leclercq, the VP of Talent Acquisition at Wise. Jerome, welcome to the Open to Work podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a pleasure. And thank you again for getting my surname right.
Well, I practiced it before I came on a few times just to make sure that I was even close.
Good to hear.
So in these candidate journey episodes, we get to unpack a lot of what kind of the recruiting process is really like in certain businesses. And I really love these. It gives, both candidates that are hopefully going through the process at Wise, but also candidates all around the world, insight into how businesses really think about hiring. And so, I can't wait to get stuck into this. But before we kind of go into the Wise process, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and your background and what you do at Wise?
Sure. So, Jerome, hi, everybody. I'm a 20-year veteran of the talent acquisition industry. I probably shouldn't say that because it's going to date me, but I've pretty much done every aspect of recruiting. I started in agency, moved to RPO, moved to in-house, across IT outsourcing, banking, financial services, fintech, tech, you name it. So, been at Wise for just nearly 2 years now. Spent a big part of my journey here, 9 years at LinkedIn. When I joined at a lucky time where I was one of very few recruiters outside of Dublin and San Francisco. So I got a real hands-on opportunity to build offices all over Europe, which was a really, really great experience. And then spent 3 years in product marketing, trying to localize LinkedIn for the European market.
Very fun. And so now you're the VP of TA at Wise. That was formerly TransferWise and is why don't you kind of give us a little introduction to Wise as a business and where they are in the world, size and shape, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So Wise, formerly known as TransferWise, we're getting the brand transition right. We've been around since 2011, so was it 13 years, went public in 2021. And we really kind of focus on solving one core problem, which is called cross-border payments. So we don't do crypto, we don't do everything else across the FS landscape like you'll see some of our competitors do, which is entirely focused on cross-border payments. It's a sizable opportunity. It's also a sizable problem for consumers, and that's what we focus on. And really, we have 3 core pillars on how we think about cross-border payments. So transparency. We want to make sure that there are no hidden fees. I don't know how familiar or how many times you go to change money to go abroad, but I remember going to a bank and then changing 100 euros and then realizing that, I got charged a ridiculous exchange rate and a service fee and a transaction fee, and I wasn't left with very much at the end of it. So we believe that, all of those fees or any fees that you get charged should be visible on the product. And actually you should be, your exchange rate should be the Google exchange rate. So that's what we believe about transparency. So lower costs, which ties into that. It shouldn't cost you the earth to do a cross-border payment or an exchange. It should be convenience. So, the tool should be best in class. You should be able to exchange or transfer money when you want to, as easily as you want to. And it should be instant. So it shouldn't take you any longer than sending an email to do a cross-border payment. So that's the problem that we solve.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm a customer, and I use TransferWise all the time, and it's also integrated into the back end of my bank, so that I use TransferWise every single time. I use Wise, every single time I go abroad. And I think if you live in the UK, you probably like TransferWise, formerly known as TransferWise, right? Like it's hard to disassociate yourself from that brand because it was such a darling. Like when I was growing up, it was one of the fintech businesses. I say growing up, as fintech was growing in the UK, this was one of the big businesses that everyone was excited about, and it was massively changing the landscape of payments, and still is. And I think maybe in America, I don't know how it's kind of perceived. I'd love to hear your insights into maybe how it's perceived in America versus it is in the UK. But in the UK, it has a very strong brand presence, it feels like, and is really seen as kind of one of the main leaders in the space, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have quite the same amount of brand presence as we do in America as we do in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
In the marketplace, I think like most products, the marketplace in the US is always way more competitive. So, we have more competitors, or more direct competitors, should I say, in North America. But, we're growing really, really quickly. So I'm in Austin today. We're growing the Austin hub significantly. We're going to triple our footprint here from a headcount perspective in the next couple of years. So we're really investing in the market. And we're signing some amazing customers, across the Americas. We recently announced a partnership with Nubank in Brazil.
Oh, wow.
So, if you're a Nubank customer and you're using the Nubank app and you want to do a cross-border payment, you go through the natural flow, and then you'll see kind of powered by Wise at the bottom. So we make our infrastructure, our technology available to large banks and cross-border providers to use our services.
That's amazing. And so just from just to get into the kind of nuts and bolts, how many employees is Wise at the moment, and how is that split around the world roughly?
Yeah, so it's nearly 6,000 employees.
Nice.
We're split across 11 core hubs globally, but primarily, vast majority of our headcount is in Austin, London, Tallinn, Budapest, and Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And proudly, we have 125 different nationalities at Wise. So we are really, truly international, global, diversified business.
And so why don't you tell me a bit about why it's exciting and why, you've been there 2 years. What keeps you there? What's exciting about Wise at the moment?
Yeah, so I think that is kind of part of my candidate pitch, but I think everybody at Wise, it doesn't matter if you come into HR, finance, product engineering. I mean, everybody connects to the mission. Essentially what we do, cross-border payments, is one of the most expensive products for consumers. And it shouldn't be like that, right? And I guess for me personally, my connection to this is I've had some pretty awful banking experiences. Getting mortgages out has been painful. Getting things done with my different banks and financial services providers are usually quite as smooth as it should be. So I kind of deeply connect with the mission and what we're trying to do for customers, and really simplifying the way that we do cross-border payments, but also bringing transparency about how people get charged and why they get charged. So I think everybody at Wise connects to the mission, usually on a very personal level, which is, I think, quite unique. Mm-hmm. And Wise is an organization where the mission is achievable, right? We want to be a cross-border provider globally for everybody, and it's the mission that we focus on every single day. So we'll get to it probably in the discussion, but when we look at candidates, we think deeply about how is that person going to incrementally help us achieve our mission.
Yeah, I love that. And from when you kind of speak to other people across the business, so obviously the mission is very important, but what are the consistent pieces of feedback that you're getting around why people may love to work there?
A lot of companies say they're customer centric. We obsess about the customer, and very kind of humbly, I remember my first few weeks of Wise, and meeting with Christo, our founding CEO, and I'd spend weeks and days putting my talent acquisition strategy together. I was going to blow socks off. It's going to be amazing. And I remember him looking at it, kind of flicking through the slides. I couldn't really read his face. And his first question, and really the only question, was, okay, great, but what are you going to do for the customer? And I was like, what, do you mean candidates, or do you mean hiring managers? It was, no, the customer, right? The people that use our product. And that's the experience of everybody at Wise. Regardless of what function you join, it's really kind of obsessing about what are you going to do to get us closer to our mission? What are you going to do to make sure that we are reducing fees for customers? We're giving them a better experience. We're transparent about the way that we do business. How am I going to, incrementally impact our mission and deliver against it?
What did you say out of interest? How does recruiting impact the customer?
So I went through what you probably would do on the spot, right? And go down, customers, candidates are customers, or there will be future customers. And, we want to focus on the experience. And then I was kind of trying to read his face, and I was kind of, okay, so, but, let me go and work it out, and I'll come back to you.
And what did you conclude?
But coming back, I think what was really interesting in my experience is coming back and thinking about it deeply is we want the service to be free for customers. So as we increase our volume, we reduce the transaction fee over time. Mm-hmm. So there's a way to think about when you're managing a budget to think about how do you contribute to that? So what is your baseline budget? And as you scale your vendors and you scale your organization and your team, how do you think of actually driving more efficiency in your budget? So essentially you're reducing your budget per head over time, and you're able to give money back to the business, who's then able to reduce fees and costs for the customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that because, when I speak to candidates quite a lot, I say, I try and coach them around how to position their impact and their experience. And I kind of talk about this as either adding revenue or reducing costs. Like everyone's role sits across either one or both of those outcomes. And I love that it kind of pushes you as like an individual, regardless of what your function is, to really deeply understand that connection to the cost or revenue impact. And ideally making sure that kind of money goes back into the hands of the customer. There's very few businesses that I know that push people to think like that, regardless of what their function is. It's normally quite siloed away from the mission. You have to, sort of retrospectively apply it after you've worked there almost when you get into an interview.
100%.
And very few people, it sounds like at Wise, everyone is kind of connected to that, which is really interesting to hear.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely a unique experience. I'm learning so much every single day on how to do my job in a different way and do it better. Yeah. I think it's invaluable skills.
Very cool. And so why don't you walk me through at a very high level what I should expect as a candidate, kind of walking, when I interact with Wise for the first time, for the moment that I'm like deciding whether or not to apply, all the way through to the kind of offer and what that kind of high level process looks like to start off with, and then we'll kind of go a bit deeper. So Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
Yeah, so I think we're not too unusual, I guess. So I've done my research. I listened to a couple of your episodes. We're not that too different to some of previous guests that you have, right? So we have a screen, which typically is anything from 30 to 60 minutes, depending as to the part of the business and some of the kind of the pre-questions that we've worked with the business to ask candidates. And then typically candidates will move into 2 to 3 additional stages. Mm-hmm. In a few parts of our business, there will often be either a case study or a take-home task or some sort of kind of co-coding exercise. Mm-hmm. I think what's maybe not unique, but something I've not seen in many places before, is that in at least 2 of those interviews, you'll have 2 interviewers in a room.
Oh, interesting. Why have you made that decision?
And we do that primarily to remove bias. So we want to make sure that when candidates are answering questions, we're getting 2 interpreters, 2 people responding to that conversation. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of calibrate feedback and responses with the interviewers afterwards.
That's interesting.
And then pre-interview days, who
are also responsible.
We also did it so that somebody could scribe the answers and the other person could engage in a conversation with the candidate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm fascinated by dual interviewing as a concept because I know we won't go into it, but I always wonder whether or not it's a good use of people's time to have 2 people. In theory, they're getting the same data input, right? And you've got MetaView that's proving that they're both receiving the same data. And so how is the output the output should always be identical is my theory. I'd love to do you see like much variability in the answers? When 2 people come out of that room, like what is that discussion? How is that working? How are you making that decision?
Not as much. Certainly not since I've been here. So, and you're right. These are the things that we discuss in a kickoff meeting with stakeholders, which is, your focus is to move quickly. We're going to have to engage at least 7 or 8 interviewers into this process because we're doing dual interviewing, so many in different time zones. How is that going to restrict us from actually moving quickly? So it's a trade-off. We can do this, we can continue to do this. It's going to take us longer, or we can actually lean on single interviewers and maybe move a little bit faster. Yeah. And guess what we do is we try not to make the decision for the business, but we try to give them the opportunity we consult with them on the options.
Yeah. Yeah. If any recruiters are ever listening to this, right, optionality, right? You rarely make a decision for the business. You give them the options, you present them the risks and the opportunities, and allow them to make the decision, knowing what the risks are associated with the outcome. And that's really kind of a business advisory and consultation and partnership 101.
Yeah, 100%. It's the model here is, moving recruiters to a consultant mindset, and it's exactly that.
So, what do you think is kind of unique, maybe, about how Wise makes the decision around the sorts of candidates that they want to hire?
We focus a lot on so we do like situational interviews, behavioral interviews, and we do that to assess, I guess, alignment around experience. And we'll talk hopefully a little bit better in more detail as to how we do this. But then we have another lens to it, which is based on what we are, who we are as a business, making cross-border payments globally available to everybody has never been done before, right? There are no global retail banks out there. So we're effectively trying to solve a problem that nobody's ever solved before. And that's always at the back of our minds when we start thinking about the more human skill sets that we try to assess in candidates. How resilient are you going to be? How creative are you going to be? Because the reality of working at Wise is you've got to come up with different solutions all the time. And the vast majority of the time is you will fail. And that's what happens when you work in a business, when you're trying to solve a problem that's never been solved before. We don't know what's going to happen down the road. So you've got to be able to stand back up. And we do a lot of retros across the business and in recruitment, just to understand like what went well, what didn't, and how can we approach the problem from a different angle. So we're always looking at this kind of core skills of resilience. We're looking at learning agility. If I've got to solve a problem that I've never solved before, I'm going to have to think differently in the way that I've thought solving problems before, right? So I may come with a vast amount of experience around my expertise, and then to some degree, I'm going to have to park that at the door and adapt to the Wise mission, to the way that we do business across the organization, and then pull in the layers of experiences that can help me guide me into the right direction. And that's not always the case with candidates. So those are the kind of things that we think about in the back end.
And so just to recap that, you evaluate resilience, a kind of ability to think in kind of on first principles ways and come up with kind of completely new solutions. Was there a third that I missed?
So resilience, learning agility, and the third is really about like really deep collaboration. So what I love about my job at Wise is that we're one people team in my function, right? It's like recruitment does not sit separately from the people function. In fact, I don't see myself as the VP of TA. I see myself as just a people leader. But that's the same across the business. Like I'm here to solve business problems, and I come with it from an experience and a skill set within the people space. So I can't do anything without deeply collaborating with my engineering stakeholders or leaders, with the product leaders, with the finance leaders, think about workforce planning. And so to be able to assess that deep collaboration and get super deep into real experience of working collaboratively versus working alongside someone to achieve something, but you're really kind of seeing it from a personal agenda perspective.
Would you have to give me an example of how you might, like maybe like an example of how you might assess each of those in a candidate?
So I think even right at the beginning through the screen, right? When you go through the CV review or the experience review with a recruiter, it's what kind of opportunities have you taken through your career? So are you doing the same role over and over in the same industries? And maybe, maybe you have an expertise that you've developed in a cookie cutter way of doing things you take from one organization to another. Or do you have itchy feet and kind of you lean into different experiences? You lean into different projects. You collaborate across different functions that are naturally aligned to yours. And often we know this by the quality of the examples that candidates give us. So you'll meet candidates who have that one really good example, and they'll use it over and over again, right? So you might interview the candidate, and then I will interview the same candidate after you, and you and I will get together and go, hey, what do you think? hey, that person gave me example A, and like, oh yeah, they gave me example A as well, and we're assessing different things, but that kind of keeps giving us the same examples, and that's often a good read on like what's been the breadth of curiosity that candidate has across the way that they do their job and the way that they impact customers and the business.
Yeah. So just to take a step back then. So when we look at the interview process itself, so you'll apply via the Wise website, presumably, or kind of one of where LinkedIn or whatever. Do you have anything like core in that application form that is worth like calling out to? Some people use it more or less than others. Like what's like important to know about the application form, if anything?
There's nothing unusual in there, so we try to make it as seamless as possible.
Okay.
So we've not gone crazy about trying to reinvent what the application flow should be. I mean, the focus for us was really focusing on simplicity, right? Which is, one of our core product values, and we tried to bring that into
Perfect. And so you've applied. The recruiter has reviewed and evaluated your CV. There's no like kind of real supplemental kind of assets that sound like you need to send over with that. And the recruiter screen is kind of going through the kind of standard stuff like high level like evaluation of your fit for the role, as well as notice periods, compensation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And by far the most important question, aside from the lineman with experience in the role, is like how much you know about Wise. We are a very product centric organization. Like everybody has a say about the product. We have a really strong NPS of about 68, which for a consumer app is really good. But that's based on people giving us feedback. So you're going to apply for a job at Wise. Like, what do you know about us? Have you downloaded the app? Have you played around with it? Have you used it? Are you a customer? Are you not? It's really easy to tell. Like, and believe it or not, we ask the question every single time, and we have a ton of candidates say to us, "Look, I don't know that much. Somebody in my family has used it, but I know you're a cool company," which probably isn't the best answer to be giving.
It's such a basic one, and so many people that I speak to don't do this. Like as a recruiter, like the amount of times that you ask this question and you get like a rubbish response, and it's a little bit of prep. You can even put it into ChatGPT, summarize what this company does at a barbecue, so I can tell someone at a barbecue or explain it to my mum. Like even just something as basic as that, right? Like can help you even if the business is very complex, can help you understand how to articulate it really clearly. I used to do for every single frontline sales rep or frontline customer service person, would get them on the first call within the first 5 minutes to tell me what the business did and explain to me how it impacted the customer. And if they couldn't do that succinctly, I would reject them and say, look, we need someone who's probably done a bit more research and is being a bit more proactive on this sort of stuff. So it's probably not going to be a match. It's like a really simple one. If you're applying for a customer centric role, know what the product does.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we don't want to force people to be customers before they apply for a job, but all the answers to those questions are on our career site.
Yeah.
We'll tell you about our mission. We'll tell you what we're doing, what we do. We'll tell you about our values. We'll tell you about what customers think. So it's basic prep, really.
It's basic prep. And so once they've done that, are they go into, or they assessed, so if you're technically at all at that point, or is it go straight to a hiring manager interaction? Like what's the next stage?
It depends on the function. Wise, we got anything from like niche, NED board recruitment to servicing customer support to KYC agents, which is, we're talking here about thousands and thousands of hires every year. So, the process is tailored for the flow of candidates that we have.
Yeah.
And we'll use the right assessments in the right place and the right places. But yeah, it could be either or an assessment or a conversation with the hiring lead.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, if you're like it's a very high volume role, you might do like some sort of evaluation straight off the bat that will be kind of relatively automated. If you're doing a software engineer, you might have a paired coding exercise interaction. If it's a corporate role, you probably will have some sort of hiring manager interview they'll do like a skills assessment via a structured interview.
Exactly. And if you're joining the analytics team, then there'll probably be some piece of analysis or a case study for you to work on.
Yeah, nice. And then do you have any kind of particular philosophies that you apply to like how you think about case studies? Because I know that lots of candidates nowadays are getting really frustrated with how many of these case studies they're being asked to write. I'd love to hear your perspective on like what your philosophy is about how you approach this as a business. We are delighted to be sponsored by MetaView. MetaView is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using MetaView across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with MetaView. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls.
So I completely get the frustration because it's very time consuming. The thing with case studies and those type of tasks is it's probably one of the best ways to get a read on somebody's ability to perform the role. So you just mentioned it, right? Like if you hire salespeople, you're going to want them to pitch to you their current organization and like what's in it for the customer. You're going to be brought in. So maybe the exercise here is, hey, you're going to have to come and be ready to pitch to us for 15 minutes about your current business, right? Or if you're doing analysis, and we might need to see actually, how do you think about, what's your critical thinking skills like? How are your problem solving skills like? How do you think about analysis? So it seems like quite time consuming in the first place, but it probably saves a ton of additional interviews to get a deeper read on, can you actually do the role in the way that we need you to do the role?
Yeah. And I always like to say that like a good case study should be informative to the candidate as well. They should be like, this is what it's like to do your role. Like if you're like, we used to, go back to sales hiring, if you're not comfortable cold calling someone in certain environments, then this isn't going to be the right environment. So the first thing we're going to do is test your ability to be in a very uncomfortable situation where you have to get on the phone and call someone and pitch them without, like, in the first couple of minutes of speaking to them, which not everyone is very comfortable doing, and it self-selects people out of different types of processes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the case studies is they're real case studies. Like we don't just make up theoretical things. We actually give candidates real problems that we're trying to solve. So if you're going to come in and join product or the data analysis team, we will give you an actual case study around, hey, here's the inflow of customers that we're seeing, and here's the feedback that we're getting on the product, and like, how do you correlate the two, and what suggestions you have?
Yeah.
So it's beneficial for the candidate as well, because they get a real life experience of, this is what you'll be doing every single day.
And so on average then, how many, I know this will vary wildly, but like on average, how many stages should I expect as a candidate?
So aside from the recruiter screen, you'll probably have on average 3 interviews.
Yeah. So one of them will be some sort of case study. One of them will be some sort of hiring manager interaction, and one of them will be a dual interview.
Exactly.
And the dual interview, is that like more of like a cultural focused interview?
So I guess that's probably the biggest takeaway of this episode for candidates applying for WISE, which is all the answers to the questions that we're going to ask you, most of them are in our career site. Because all of the questions that we ask, whether they're situational or behavioral questions, are based on our values. Our values are on our career site. We explain to you what they are.
So you follow almost like a leadership principles interviewing approach, like Amazon do.
Yeah, like an attributes-based approach too.
Yeah,
so everything is linked back to our values.
Are built around the leadership, like your kind of your values, and that's kind of with a focus that will be slightly oriented around the experience needed for the role.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good tip, right? Like the reality is that almost all organizations as well will kind of will have some sort of like cultural type assessment that's happening in the background, either actively or passively. But knowing exactly that you're going to be assessed for those four behaviors and those 4 values. So make sure that you can speak to them really effectively straight off the bat. Like there's one of the things
that struck me when I joined WISE is I didn't have a culture interview. I was used to having culture interviews through processes, and I actually said it at the end. I was like, I don't think you've assessed me for, would that be a good cultural add to the organization? They were like, no, trust me, we have. And is how we did it is like through the questions that we asked you, the four tenets, the four values that we have that link back to the way that we do business in our culture, that's where the questions came from.
Yeah.
Which actually I think is a really good way to make it feel seamless.
Yeah.
Instead of being invited in for the culture interview, and you're like,
yeah,
what does that mean?
Yeah, I agree. And then, so how do you make decisions? Like, so you've gone through the interview process. You're sitting in it sounds like a debrief room. Do you have like a philosophy or a framework that you think about to make a hiring decision?
So this is a bit of a work in progress for us as we drive more consistency globally and across those kind of scaling functions. But we started to introduce more wash-up sessions with interviewers and stakeholders. Just make sure that we are aligning on, we ask you to assess around one of our values, which is we get it done, right? And then the attributes that we had within this is, being data-driven and resilient. And then the questions that you've asked are ABC, right? So like, how does that calibrate versus the other three elements of the quadrant that everyone else has assessed again? And second layer to the wash-up session is what's the weighting of each of these? So I'm looking for principal engineers. We also assess that person on leadership, but that may not be as important. Your experience in leadership may not be as important as your experience in system architecture. And I think those calibrations are very difficult to do if you don't get everybody in the room and have a conversation.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we try to be, and it's a work in progress, but the other thing that we try to get quite specific about, which is we make clear to interviewers that the question isn't whether that person should be hired or not. The question is, based on the value and the skills that we've asked you to assess, how well has that person performed? And I think it's a change in mindset, right?
Super important. Yeah.
We're not asking people to come in and say, yes, you should hire, not hire that person.
Yeah.
We should people to come in and say, okay, well, that person is a 3, 4, 5 stars out of 5, right? And here are the reasons why. And that's a subtle difference. And the way that we try to do this practically is we try and use kind of decision-making models or frameworks. So, one I've used since my days of LinkedIn is the RAPID model, or people use the RACI model, which is, like who's responsible for performing or recommending a hiring process, but who's responsible for the input, and the input are the interviewers. But the input is not the D. The D is a decision maker, and the decision maker is a hiring lead. So your job as an interviewer is to provide input to help the decision maker, therefore the hiring lead, to make an effective evidence-based decision.
So I absolutely love that, and I completely agree with everything you've just said. So I think if you're a candidate listening to this, basically what's happening behind the scenes is that every single interviewer is going to have a specific, like, let's say you have, there's 4 things that you're being assessed on, that make up your kind of ability to evaluate whether or not you can do this job. Each interviewer is taking 1 or 2 of those. So in each stage, you're going to be evaluated for something very, very specific. And then in this meeting at the end, everyone's coming together and Jerome, and the team are saying, look, interviewer number 1, Matthew, what did you think of their ability to be a leader of recruiting, of their leadership abilities, right? Or what did you think of their ability to be resilient? And I'll give an evaluation of that based on the competency matrix that WISE have put in place. And then the hiring manager will listen to this and say, okay, based on all of this input, I'm going to make X, Y, Z decision. And that's, realistically kind of how, the right way to hire at the moment. And is that kind of structured interviewing process is a really strong method of hiring. And please correct me immediately if I've misspoken there at all about your kind of philosophy and your structure.
No, that's exactly that. I mean, as you would know as a talent leader, right? It's a work in progress. So
yeah. These things are very hard to implement.
There isn't 100% consistency across our Singapore interviewers and our New York interviewers. Yeah. It's constantly a reiteration of, hey, have you done the interviewer training, which is exactly that, and then how do you apply it in practice? And so, I don't want to. Candidates should have a consistent experience, but there might be times where they come across an interview that doesn't necessarily.
And obviously you're always striving towards achieving this, like in structured interviewing decision-making processes. It benefits the company and it benefits the candidate as well. And it, you want to ensure that everyone has like an equal opportunity to do that, which I'm sure that the WISE team are doing their utmost to ensure that that's happening for every single candidate and is consistent around the world. So, and then the ultimate decision is that the hiring leaders, then the hiring manager.
Yes.
Sounds really, I mean, very, very interesting. And like, I think what I've kind of taken away from this is how important your kind of preparation is, and how important the kind of broader values are of your business, how customer centric kind of your responses should be as a candidate. So I think there's plenty to take away there. But what's like a kind of a classic mistake that you see by a candidate?
Can't underestimate preparation, right? You have to prep. You will fail at the first hurdle if you don't even know where we add value as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to go deeper, maybe to give you a slightly different example, is that you've got to be savvy in understanding the business that you're interviewing with and tailor your examples to what matters to that business.
Yeah.
So if you're coming into a fintech environment and you know on our career site that we care about accountability, resilience, collaboration, and a tie back to our values, and you're applying for a role that, say, is in the HR space or the finance space, but then you come and give a star example of something that's in a completely different function in investment banking, where you implemented a stock trade measurement software. It's going to be really hard for the interviewers to kind of lean in and drive the parallels in your experience.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And then when you think about your examples in the STAR model, which I know you've touched on with Fritz in a previous episode, it's think about the R first. Think about the results. Think about your examples like a newspaper headline. Because I think a lot of candidates tell you about their tasks and actions. They tell you about what they do every day. And don't spend enough time telling you about the impact that's had for customers or the business.
Yeah.
Right. And when I hire in my team and TA leaders, the one thing that everybody always tells me is how many hires they've made in their previous organization. Right. I've led a team of 27 and we made 2,000 hires. I have no idea if that's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Your headcount plan could have been 4,000, right? So you've hit 50%. Or your headcount plan could have been 1,000 and your OPEX have been doubled and blown. So it's really about what's been the result of making those hires. We enable the business to do A, B, C, or we've delivered 1, 2, 3 for the customer. Start with that and then work backwards to the situation, the task, and the actions.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, and I think there's this interesting thing that candidates. We'll get a little bit off topic here, but like one of my philosophies at the moment is that candidates spend too much time thinking about themselves and don't spend enough time thinking about the business. And I think really like if you only did two things in a star example, set the situation up, give them the result. The actions and stuff like that is like fine. You'll get into that in a second. But if you have a good enough context set and you have a good enough result, they want to ask you more questions. They want to learn more, and you can get into it, and it sets you up for success. Like you almost want to go SRA, like TA or something. Like it really like so many people miss both the S and the R from a star response: situation, task, action, result is what we're talking about here. And it's and I can't tell you how many people I've coached that just focus on the actions. Like that's all
exactly
they talk about.
They think that they should justify where they spend their time, which actually most organizations don't care about that. Just they care about what have you delivered? What's the impact have you had for the customer or for the organization?
Yeah, I love that. So that's one mistake. Maybe tell us about a story about a candidate in the business that really stood out, and obviously anonymizing their name and their role and stuff. But tell me about a candidate who really stood out.
There's many examples. So I think what I might kind of give more the theoretical example here, but what the candidates that stand out of Wise are the ones that have the highest quality of questions for you. So there's a direct correlation between their motivation for the role, the organization, and their relevance for the position they're applying for within the question that they're asking. So the wrong answer is always not to have any questions, right? And usually the more specific the question, the better the question.
Yeah.
So it could be, okay, we've just spoken about this topic, but I'm not quite clear. So help me understand specifically what you meant by Wise doing this or doing that. Or I read something in your FY24 result that you've changed something in your business model.
Mm-hmm.
How would that impact the way that the finance team will operate moving forward? And those examples always stand out, because what tends to neutralize the conversation is your standard questions all the candidates ask. Right?
What's your culture like? How many days off do I need to be in the office? How much annual leave do I get? Like, don't ask those questions. Get the recruiter to tell you them. Ask really impactful, interesting questions.
When a candidate asks you what the culture is like, who is ever going to turn around and say, wow, it's terrible. Terrible culture. You're going to work 20 hours a day. Be ready to have a mattress under your desk. Like, no one's ever going to say that, right?
And actually, as a candidate, that's not what it's like at Wise.
Yeah. As a candidate, if you're actively listening in an interview, you should actually get the read of the culture as well.
Yeah.
You should see that, are your interviewers standing up on time? Are they giving you an opportunity to speak? Are they engaging in the conversation instead of being like, here's a question, here's another question, here's another question? So you can read the culture in many ways. And then you can correlate it to what you've read online about the 4 pillars of cultures or values at Wise.
Yeah.
Do those make sense? So it's like, people think it's a standard good question to have, but actually it's not a great question. The more specific the question, the more you can demonstrate your research and your understanding and your motivation for the role, the better, the more value you're going to get out of the interview.
Yeah, I always used to say, if a candidate can ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, they're probably on the right track. Like, I'm not the subject matter expert at any company for anything other than recruiting, and I'm only just about a subject matter expert at that. So if you should really be able to ask anyone in the recruiting team enough questions that are deep enough and specific enough, that means that they don't know the answer because they're not the person that's delivering and hiring the role. Yeah. And so once you get to that point, you've probably started to ask the right sort of questions.
And actually, I just thought of one, just to give you an actual example. There was a candidate at first interview. So I joined in September 2022, and in December, I think it was December or January, but December 22 or January 23, we had a candidate who had just lost. We interviewed a candidate and eventually hired that person. They just lost their job. They'd just been redundant in an organization. And what really mattered to that individual as they got to understand Wise and they got to do the maths and thought, all right, so you kind of you set up in 2011. The last big recession was 2008. You've been a business that's grown through the good times, right? You've never really been through an economic crisis. And they made it really personal. They said, look, I want to go somewhere that's really stable. You've never gone through a tough economic environment. What plans are you putting in place? There's an economic downturn now. Everybody's aware of it. Recruitment is kind of decreasing significantly. How are you kind of shoring up the business to make sure that you don't have to make tough decisions and to make sure that you're still going to grow? And I thought that was a very thoughtful question.
And personal and important for this person, because they would have been carrying trauma from being made redundant and having to go and do a job search, and they didn't want to go through that experience again. Exactly. Okay, my last question for you, Jerome. What are I imagine there's loads of themes that are coming through here, so a bit of a repetition for you, but to take us away, what are your top 3 recommendations for any candidates who want to work at Wise?
So be curious, do your prep, right? So read. It's actually really easy. All you have to do is go through our career site. Go through it, deeply understand it. Be very clear on our 4 values. Take those 4 values into ChatGPT and come up with some behavioral, situational, competency-based questions, and then practice your STAR answers in reverse. Right, to your point, start with the situation, the results, and then worry about the task and actions later. If you can do that really, really well, you'll get very far in an interview process otherwise.
Amazing. Any other tips? You said 3, you've given 1, but that's okay.
I thought I'd give 3 in 1, but okay, it's fine. I think be conscious of, within the construct of an organization trying to solve a problem that's never been solved before, be ready to unlearn. So, and then typically what I tend to find is the more experienced candidates I speak to, the lower their learning agility is. Be willing to unlearn what you know from previous organizations in the way that you've done things and adapt to the way that Wise does business and the way that we solve problems. And as I said, demonstrate how you could put in your experience to operate in a different way. And the last bit is authenticity. You can't people can see it, right? It's just be you. It's okay not to have the answer to a question. it's okay not to feel like you've got to answer straight away. Like, some good old tips of somebody's asking you a question, you kind of, oh, I've not thought about that. I have an example. I need to give myself a couple of seconds, like take a sip of water,
Yeah.
or ask the interviewer to repeat the question, just so I'm hearing you right. This is the question I'm hearing. Is this correct? Right? Give yourself mentally 5-10 seconds to think a bit more.
Yeah.
Those are tips
That's an underrated piece of advice, that.
Correct. And it's, they're existential, but you see people forgetting about those. So we'll see if you can do that well in any interview process, and not just the whys. I think you'll go quite far.
And just to add on to that, one of the nice ways of doing this and buying yourself a bit of time is just reframing the question back at them. So just to confirm, like, what I think you're trying to ask me there is kind of X, Y, and Z. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Let me split that into 2 parts. Bosh. Like, and it just gives you that slight bit of structure to help you bide a bit more time and go through your answer. Amazing.
And that was, I just interviewed somebody yesterday actually who did that really well, and my feedback was that person is demonstrating really strong active listening skills, because that's one of the core pillars of active listening, is actually play back what you're hearing.
Yeah.
At the same time, that person was probably biding themselves time so they can give you the right answer.
And just to play back what I'm hearing, it's good for active listening for you to play back what you're hearing.
That's exactly that.
There you go. I mean, Jerome, thank you so much for coming on. We got through so much there, and I hopefully kind of candidates listening to this who are interested in whys are only more interested in kind of listening to kind of the way that you kind of authentically have broken down the interview process here. It's not kind of this hasn't really been like many of the other episodes we've done. We've gone quite deep on a couple of different kind of quite interesting topics here, so I really appreciate that. And it's been a great speaking to kind of some of the exciting things that you're working on at Wise as well. So if you are interested in joining a role at Wise, then obviously check out the careers page. Sounds like Jerome, they have all the answers. So jump onto the Wise careers page, and keep following us on the Open to Work podcast as well. These are our candidate journey streams. We've got a whole bunch of other companies that have come on and are still to come on. And also, if you want to kind of get hands-on advice on kind of how to navigate some of these processes, then check out the Open to Work community. That's opentowork.community to get hands-on advice from job search coaches from all around the world. So Jerome, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to see you again in person very soon, and good luck on and safe travels back from Austin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.